Good morning, friends. Welcome to another week during our winter retreat here at Empty Cloud Monastery. And hello to Michael, who says, good morning, short sutta today. Yes, that's right. I sent a little link of my 3-line sutta. And hello to Geeta. Welcome this morning. And hello to everyone else who is tuning in. How's your friend? Good to see you. All right. So before starting anything else, hello to Kelly from the UK. Oh, wonderful. And good afternoon. I believe that's more accurate for you, Kelly. All right, so before we begin, we can pay homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami. So we can start by reading this beautiful sutta, Anguttara Nikaya 745. You on the link that I sent, you have a different translation. It's from Bhante Sujato, but I will be reading from the translation from Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. But it's always good to have different translations. So different words sometimes evoke different meanings, different understandings of the words of the Buddha. So Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi has translated them this way. There are, bhikkhus, these 7 accessories of concentration. What 7? Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, and right mindfulness. One-pointedness of mind equipped with these 7 factors is called noble right concentration, with its supports and with its accessories. So we can close our eyes and spend a few moments contemplating these verses. Gently open your eyes again. And probably for some of you, the first thought that appeared in the mind was, well, I thought this workshop was called the Miracle of Mindfulness. So why is she talking about concentration? I think this monk is a little bit crazy. She got a few things wrong, didn't she? Or is it mindfulness? Or is it concentration? That's a very good question, which is actually the question that I wanted to explore this morning. And fundamentally, it's not that the Buddha does not talk about right mindfulness here. He does, or mindfulness. He talks about right mindfulness in relation to concentration. And especially in Western circles, or actually in Asian circles too, in the past century or the past decades, there's been a huge sort of emphasis on mindfulness in terms of it almost being kind of like the sort of goal. Whether we're monastics, whether we're lay people, sometimes that's kind of like the only thing that actually is highlighted, full stop. But when one starts actually delving more deeply into the texts, we see how absolutely mindfulness in all its facets, which we will go through and explore during this workshop. So not only sort of sati per se, but all the different nuances that the Buddha talks about. the nuances of sati that talks about in the suttas. But what he highlights all the time is the interdependence of sati with all the other qualities that one needs to develop in the path, and namely sila, samadhi, and panya. In the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition, these days they have sila, samadhi, panya, and sati. So it's interesting because it's a little bit after 2,500 years of sila, samadhi, panya. Now there's sila, samadhi, panya, sati, which is not to say that it's incorrect, quite the opposite. But it's interesting how it seemed like there was a need to highlight it because it has become so much part of this sort of conversation that there is no Buddhism without mindfulness, and there is no mindfulness without Buddhism. But sometimes if we focus too much on mindfulness, we're losing the power of mindfulness. We're losing the miracle of mindfulness if we don't understand what the purpose of this is. That it's not a goal, but rather it's a means to an end. And so, as we see, what I find really beautiful of this sutta, as with all the words of the Buddha, really is that in so few words, we're getting to such a profound teaching, profound core teaching of actually interdependence and dependent origination. In this particular case, we're seeing how the Buddha says in order to develop right concentration, which is samma samadhi, there is a need for supports and accessories, which come from the rest of the 7 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. And this, first of all, highlights how there is such a thing as concentration that is wrong. And that is when the concentration does not have supports and accessories of the 7 other factors. So the same applies for mindfulness. There is right mindfulness and there is wrong mindfulness. And wrong mindfulness, as we will see throughout this workshop, it's when it's not supported by the other factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. So we see how all of these things are, not, even though they're spelled out, the Buddha is very kind and compassionate, so he spells out each one of them. But it's not like we only develop one at a time, but rather they're all interconnected and they're all supportive of one another. And we can't develop any of the single ones without developing them all at once, so to speak. And so, what is right mindfulness? Samma sati. So if it's not supported and not aimed at the goal, as we were saying, then that's when we start getting comfortable with something that is not quite the purpose of the Buddhist teachings, which is the complete removal of suffering, the complete cessation of greed, hatred, and delusion. And we're kind of like, okay, well, maybe it's all right if I remove a bit of stress here and there. There's nothing wrong with that, nothing to be ashamed. But we have to be really clear with ourselves that that is not the purpose of this path. And that is definitely a form of mindfulness, but it's not the full form. It's not the sati that leads to liberation. It's not the sati that the Buddha is talking about. And so when we're talking about the supports of sati, I wanted to quote another sutta actually, where the Buddha talks very clearly. It's actually in the same book, Anguttara Nikaya, but it's the book of the sevens, but a little bit later. So the one that we read earlier is 745, and this one is Anguttara Nikaya 770. And the Buddha says, I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's actually quite long, but I have an extract here. Actually, it's not the Buddha, but Sariputta, if I remember correctly, who says, it is impossible, Bhante, that a bhikkhu who lacks reverence for the teacher, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and the training could have reverence for concentration. And it is impossible, Bhante, that a bhikkhu who lacks reverence for the teacher, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, the training, and concentration could have reverence for heedfulness. The bhikkhu who lacks reverence for the teacher, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, the training and concentration, also lacks reverence for heedfulness. And so here we see heedfulness is one of the manifestations of sati, so appamada, which we will be talking about either this evening or tomorrow evening, or maybe all of these days. We'll see, however my mind is inclined. But we see how, a sort of cherishing for heedfulness, which is basically a manifestation of sati in everyday life, has to come from a reverence of concentration. So we think sometimes in the other way around. We think sort of in somewhat opposite ways. But rather, I think when we read these words of the Buddha, we see the supportive conditions as and the accessories, so to speak, and we see that there has to be an appreciation, a respect, a faith for the goal. So what we were saying earlier, Nibbana, the goal of all of this, the purpose of all of this is Nibbana. So how can we have an excitement, like a determination, an appreciation for Nibbana if we lack faith in the Buddha, our original teacher, in his teachings, the Dhamma, in the Sangha, all the beings who definitely for the past 2,500 years have practiced these teachings and attained liberation, or the ones who are practicing these teachings and dispelling greed, hatred, and delusion. Definitely in the past 2,500 years, but also for countless eons without discoverable beginning, all the Buddhas that have come and taught out of compassion, and all the beings who have practiced and attained liberation. So the Dhamma is not something that the Buddha made up. He was very clear about that. The Dhamma is something that is always present. It's how things are. So whether there is a Buddha present, or the teachings of the Buddha are present, or not, the Dhamma is still there. And we can see it in our lives, actually, if we're convert Buddhists, so to speak. Things were the way they were, right? Before, we were just very confused about it. So there was lots of trial and error. Sometimes we would get things right, sometimes we would get things wrong. So the results were always there. It's kind of like math. It doesn't disappear just because we're not aware of it. Or physics. I don't know all the rules of physics, but that doesn't mean that they don't apply in the world. It just means I'm ignorant about them. The theory of relativity, I still don't quite understand what it is, but that is independent of my understanding So Einstein is someone that has come to this world, discovered the theory of relativity, and shared it with us. In the same way, the Buddha, a Sama Buddha, comes to this world, does all the work, this incredible work of realizing the Dhamma for himself and then for themselves, and then sharing it with others. And so the first thing that we really need to cultivate in the mind is the quality of faith. That a lot of you are probably going to be shocked if you're not word Buddhist. They're like, "Ah, faith, what is that?" If you have some scientific um, materialist tendencies like I did when I first encountered this path, you're probably going to start blanking out and go, okay, when she let's switch the YouTube channel. Let's maybe like open Facebook and get distracted a little bit. Let's look at that meme. It's a little bit more entertaining. But it's so interesting because it actually took me so long, in a way. I mean, it feels like a long time anyway in my practice, to really come to the understanding of how important faith is, how it gives such a support for then valuing the work that we're doing. And this is why I picked the Southern Sutta, in Gutrikaya 770, because I feel like the Buddha out of compassion highlights that, of treasuring, always recollecting Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha first and foremost. First of all, it delights the mind. Been doing it. I've shared a week ago, 2 weeks ago. It's been one of my main meditation practices during this winter retreat. It helps that we have some really beautiful statues that were donated to the the monastery. So there is a beautiful statue, one of my favorite statues that I've ever seen, actually, that is here at the monastery. It fills my mind with faith. I love it. I look at the Buddha and or if I'm not in front of the statue, I recollect it in my mind. And I reflect on all the incredible qualities that this human being managed to generate, and that has made them an incredible supreme being, an extraordinary being. But that this being was just as unenlightened as I was when they started, and then became better than godlike, most supreme being. And when you think about it, you're just like, oh, wow. Yes, may I too develop a mind like that, full of blessings, without any type of hindrances, without any type of suffering, without any type of hatred, aversion, craving, without any type of delusion, and really fully understanding this world and other worlds, fully understanding any being that one relates to, where they're coming from, why they're behaving in the way they're behaving, and being capable of teaching them, of sharing the teachings to transcend suffering. Oh. Incredible. And someone who has done that without any type of guidance. How incredible. Lovely. And that's why an individual like that, a being like that, is completely worthy of offerings. It's one of the recollections that that we do as monastics, is that we're not worthy of offerings until we actually do the get the job done, remove all the taints. Up until that moment, we keep on racking up debt. So every morning, every day, whenever we have dana here, that some kind people offer to us. I have now my Buddhist guilt instead of Catholic guilt. I'm like, oh, there you go, another meal racked up in debt. Better do some work. So now my new technique is that whenever my meditation practice is not going too well, then I do translations from Pali. So then I'm like, okay, if neither go too well, then I just do a bit of loving kindness, because that's actually when the Buddha says, even if you do it for 1 second, you're done for the day. You're good. You're worthy. But anyway, getting back to that, if one really starts developing, nourishing these qualities of faith, of really admiring, appreciating an enlightened being, like the Buddha and the enlightened beings that have come after the Buddha, both at his time and these days. I have a particular fondness, for example, for Ajahn Chah. Whenever I read anything from Ajahn Chah, it delights my mind. It's very similar to the sensation I have when I hear the words of the Buddha. So an appreciation for an enlightened being, a sense of reverence and care for the Dhamma, of really, really understanding that these are precious teachings that lead towards liberation. And these become supporting, this faith becomes supportive then to really practice the precepts, whether we're monastics, then we have a little bit more precepts, or if we're lay people, just the 5 precepts, for example. So having an appreciation for the training. So precepts are not just rituals that we take on. It's not like, okay, well, the Buddha said this is good and I will be doing this that is good, or this is bad, so I won't be doing this is bad. I mean, it's better than not doing it at all, but fundamentally, it has to be taken as a training through which we create the opportunities to look at our mind and change and shift our behaviors. And so we develop an appreciation for all of this, which then, of course, creates an appreciation for concentration, for samma samadhi, for stillness of mind. And that appreciation, that care, that reverence for samma samadhi then gives us the right supportive conditions to understand, well, this is good for, this makes me understand the importance of sense restraint, of being aware in every single moment, so that I can make the right decisions through body, speech, and mind. So true care for mindfulness, but pointed in the right direction. Not just to feel good, not just because, okay, well, right now I'm a little stressed out. Let me be mindful here. But rather an understanding of what we're trying to do here, of what the purpose is. Not settling, but aspiring for pure perfection, like the Buddha, becoming Buddhas ourselves. Isn't that great? Always love the suttas where actually the Buddha talks about him being an unenlightened bodhisattva. Those actually surprisingly make me even more full of faith. I also like the Bhikkhu Samyutta, because contrarily to the Bhikkhuni Samyutta, the Bhikkhunis are all like, okay, Mara, I see you, talk to my hand, I'm enlightened. And instead the Bhikkhu Samyutta, it's all like the bhikkhus going through trials and tribulations, being completely unenlightened, and the devas going there reprimanding them. And I was like, This is so human. But then it's all the practice of the process of reaching awakening. And it's beautiful because we really see how this is actually something we can do. But we can only do something if we actually believe in it. If we aim low, we're probably not going to do anything. But if we aim, we have to be really ambitious here. So we generally don't encourage ambition. Ambition in worldly pursuits is a waste of time, but in spiritual practice, it's incredibly useful. Aim to the top, aim for enlightenment. It's possible, it's doable. And do your best with all the resources at hand. And another little sutta. So you thought that the sutta this morning was short, so so I packed it up with some others. But I wanted to really highlight this morning of how all of these factors of the Noble Eightfold Path are all interdependent. And how, once again, developing Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, it's not separate things. It's not, okay, today I decide to develop this, and tomorrow this other one, or maybe this lifetime, I dedicate myself to this. And then the rest, who knows? But rather, all of it creates right conditions. So it's also very important to cultivate directly mindfulness. And so in Anguttara Nikaya 5.6, the Book of the Fives, the Buddha says, when there is no restraint of the sense faculties, for one deficient in restraint of the sense faculties, virtuous behavior lacks its proximate cause. When there is no virtuous behavior for one deficient in virtuous behavior, right concentration lacks its proximate cause. When there is no right concentration for one deficient in right concentration, the knowledge and vision of things as they really are lacks its proximate cause. When there is no knowledge and vision of things as they really are for one deficient in the knowledge and vision of things as they really are, disenchantment and dispassion lack their proximate cause. When there is no disenchantment and dispassion for one deficient in disenchantment and dispassion, the knowledge and vision of liberation lacks its proximate cause. So what I love, the reason, once again, I picked these three suttas, it's that they all kind of start at different points of the path, or what we think anyway, of the path being this sort of university course that first class you do this topic, and then once you graduate, then at the end, you become an enlightened being. But rather it's and I feel like that's the compassion of the Buddha, of saying the same things over and over again, but in different ways, and starting at different points of what we think the path is, to get us to understand that there is no such thing as putting these teachings in boxes and only focusing on one at a time. And in this particular sutta, he talks about how if there is no restraint of the sense faculties, there cannot be any virtuous behavior. So we see the first practice of generosity, for example, that we tend to put it under, just sila, and that's it. And a lot of us are kind of like, oh, boring, whatever. Samadhi and Panya are a lot more interesting. Maybe I'll actually just do Panya, because I heard that there's something like dry inside, so I don't even have to care about Samadhi. Why develop all three when I can just develop one, and actually just one element out of that one? I have a fast track right there. So we like the shortcuts. a lot of the times. But actually, when we really delve into the practice of generosity, which, by the way, is sort of the pillar base when we see traditional Asian Buddhism, it's incredible how um, basically the suttas, all this body of knowledge, is embedded in the day-to-day life of people who go to the temple. And most of the time, they don't even sit on a meditation cushion. So the practice of generosity itself is actually a lot more complex, a lot more profound than what we normally give it to. And it's the first and major practice of letting go, for example. There's both wisdom, it's a lot of panya. You need to understand that it's something worthy to do, and there is something worthy to let go of. It's a practice of renunciation. And in order to do that, you need to have awareness, you need to have self-restraint. You're cultivating a lot of beautiful factors in the path. Understanding, for example, whenever you see, or really, really always warms my heart whenever I'm surrounded by people who were born Buddhist, is the incredible joy they have before, during, and after giving. There is never like the sense, oh, I have to do this thing because it's like whatever one of the rituals that we do, or the precepts my parents told me to do this thing. Okay, well, I guess I'll just give the crappiest thing that I have in the house, maybe the candle that they gave me for Christmas that I don't really like. Let me go and give it to the temple. So I've given something, I made merit. But rather, it's the opposite. It's looking at what is the best thing that I can give to the temple. To be at the receiving end sometimes can actually be getting back to, your Soma, you get more and more in debt. You're like, oh, no, don't give me the best thing. Please keep it for yourself. Which is, once again, a lack of understanding of the teachings too. But getting on that perspective, it's really incredible to see how the mind rejoices instead of going, oh, this is my most favorite or the most beautiful thing, or something that I don't even buy for myself or provide for myself, like food, giving the best food to the sangha rather than giving it to yourself. Incredible, right? You're like, probably entail so much suffering. I would have so much better enjoyment if I had this meal all to myself rather than, sharing it with others. So that's where we see the cultivation of wisdom, of understanding that actually giving is more important than acquiring, than acquisition. And rejoicing while doing it is a supportive condition for concentration. As the Buddha says over and over again, a happy mind is easily concentrated. And what I've been seeing all these years running Buddhist Insights, whenever we had, not whenever, but most of the time, we would have someone who was raised Buddhist in Asia and that had hardly ever meditated at all. It was remarkable how they would come on retreat and sit still. Actually, Ayya, who is one of the monastics here at Empty Cloud, I still remember when as a lay person she came to practice, and she hadn't meditated since she was 13 years old, and she was a little bit older when she came, a few decades later. and bam, sat like a rock. That is actually the name of her name, the name we picked for her because it was very suitable. Sela means rock. There, like, bam, hours straight. And it was such an incredible teaching of how these are not just words, these are not just cute little things, rituals, but rather they are the foundations, the backbone of Buddhist practice. And that when you create that caring mind, I still remember when she started coming um, to Buddhist insights, that she noticed that Bhante Sutazo had a hole in the shoe. I hadn't even noticed. And she went and got him a new pair of sandals. And I remember observing her mind, the joy that she had found an opportunity to make merit, an opportunity to practice wisdom and letting go. So the most profound teachings right there in the basics. And so, of course, if we don't have this carefulness, this awareness, once again, restraint of the sense faculties, always being present, looking, not just, oh yeah, oh, so many pretty things at the monastery or whatever it is you are in the street, etc. But rather looking, staying, being present, and always saying, how can I practice the Dhamma? How can I make the best choice through body, speech, and mind? Then this creates the opportunity for us to practice sila. So to make wholesome decisions, wholesome choices. So virtuous behavior. And then virtuous behavior, as we were saying, or as the Buddha says, creates the conditions for right concentration. As Ayya Sela demonstrates every day, sitting like a rock. Even though she hadn't meditated for 25 years, bam, right there. And that creates, once again, when we start settling the mind becomes one-pointed. We start understanding, seeing things as they are. So instead of seeing the beautiful in the ugly, we see the ugly in the ugly. Instead of seeing the ugly in the beautiful, start seeing the beautiful in the beautiful. And by that, I mean, for example, once again, getting back to the practice of generosity, we tend to think that acquiring, a nice meal is actually better than giving a nice meal. So that is seeing the beautiful in the ugly, for example. We think it's great to acquire. It's beautiful to acquire, and it's ugly to give, but it's the other way around. So we start noticing, start understanding things as they are, not getting enchanted by the glitter, but rather getting more in sync with the reality of things. And that's when disenchantment, dispassion kick in. Because once we see that actually having an incredible feast doesn't make us happy, but giving an incredible feast, giving the best to others makes us happy. We're like, oh, well, whether I have this like incredible feast or not, it's okay. It doesn't obsess me anymore. It doesn't enslave me anymore. And that's when we're creating the supportive conditions for true liberation to kick in. So the knowledge and vision of liberation, which is different from the knowledge and vision of things as they really are. So that's when we've done what needs to be done. And we can just dwell peacefully. Done everything. This is great. I'm an Anu Buddha. I follow the teachings of another Buddha, and I am peaceful and happy. This is wonderful. This is great. I've done what had to be done. There is no coming back and doing this thing all over again, over and over again, over and over again. All this dukkha. And that's kind of the end of it. So I think that's all I had to share for this morning. So I hope it made sense. It's a little bit of an overview. And throughout the workshop, we will be exploring other suttas and go in a little bit more deep and more depth. But if you have any questions and comments, feel free to put them in the live chat because we have a few more minutes to discuss. And in the meanwhile, we've had a few new friends who have joined us. Hello, good to see you, Kyle. Edward, our New York City friends, great. Hello, Sarah, and hello, Elaine from Canada. Diana, Jay, and Gita says, thank you. Michael says, I'm learning here about sati as opposed to panya. I seem to be mixing the two. Kindly clarify for me. It's not that it's in opposition to panya. I think what you're referring to is when I said that Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh in his monastery, you'll see instead of the usual 3 sila, samadhi, and panya, you'll have sila, samadhi, panya, and sati. Or maybe he actually replaced one of them. I think he maybe replaced samadhi with sati. Maybe. I don't remember. I haven't been there in a while, but the reason why I know is because it really caught my attention when I first went to one of their monasteries. So I asked the question why it was there. And also because it was written in Sanskrit rather than Pali, because in Mahayana they use Sanskrit, so it was Mirti. And that's where I learned that, because in his sort of, in the past century, all the masters there were very focused on I don't know if this is the right word, but kind of like reforming Buddhism in a way that they were dealing with different conditions, and they were in, say, for example, Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh went to was exiled for political reasons in France, and was living in a time where French people were actually quite Catholic. So there was sort of sense and need to share the teachings in a particular way that was suitable for the conditions of the time. And so we'll see that if you start studying, which is what I've been starting to do in the past year, studying a little bit past century Buddhism, how it was shared, which is basically kind of what we have inherited. If you go to different Dharma centers here in the US or different monasteries, they're definitely influenced by the different events that have happened in the past century. So you start understanding how your mind is also a product of the times and responds to the Dhamma in a particular way. And certain teachers are understanding. They're also a product of the time. And they share the teachings in a particular way. But when you go to Asia, you'll find both. You'll find both places that sort of modernist Buddhism, so to speak. And you'll have places that have been there since forever. So like they have a different flavor of Buddhism altogether, which is actually incredibly refreshing. Like when I went to Thailand, I had my whole preconceived ideas of what Theravada Buddhism was. And then I went there and I was like, wow, all this time I was living in a bubble. Like I had created my entire version of, say, even the Thai forest tradition, which is completely disconnected from how things are. And the reason is because I was not raised in a Buddhist country, I was not raised in Asia. So all of these stories were created, were the product of causes and conditions of experiencing, learning the Dhamma here in the West at a particular time in history, if you know what I mean. This morning, I'm a little dyslexic, so. But it's free, so no refunds. So yeah, so I think getting back to that, it's not that it was in opposition to Panya, but rather he wanted to highlight it. So if you go to Thich Nhat Hanh centers, there's big mindfulness everywhere. Actually, the title of this workshop is a famous, I think, Thich Nhat Hanh book, The Miracle of Mindfulness, or it's something that they say a lot. Which is true, it is a miraculous thing once you, or not once you, but the moments that one is actually fully mindful, it's a miraculous state of being. And Michael also says, I share your reaction to the words of Ajahn Chah. I know, it's incredible. I think I read Ajahn Chah's book, was one of the first books I read because I went to an Ajahn Chah monastery. Back then, I had no idea what that was. It was just the only monastery that was close to Rome, Buddhist monastery that was close to Rome in Italy. And I went there and there were a bunch of books. And I think the first book that I picked was a Mahayana Zen book. And I had no idea that it was not of their tradition. I actually had no idea there were different traditions. I just thought, oh, yeah, Dalai Lama, they must be all like the Dalai Lama. And yeah, then I picked up a book from Ajahn Chah, and I was mind blown. I was also mind blown by the Zen master before. But yeah, it's incredible. That Dhamma Sukha is something to cherish, to nourish. It's really supportive for Buddhist practice. It's what doesn't make you complacent. A lot of times, also as monastics, it can be, you hear often like, oh, I just wished I could get back to when I had first started, when I had first ordained, or when I had first started practicing, that I was so enthusiastic. And that's because one doesn't nourish that Dhamma Sukha, then one becomes complacent with things. So luckily for now, I don't have that problem. Actually, whenever I read or hear the Dhamma, my mind brightens up and I'm like, oh, yes, I need to better myself. I need to remove greed, hatred, and delusion. So that helps me. But I can see how if I would just go like, oh, yeah, that's actually quite comfortable here at the monastery. Yeah, how about I take a little nap? Or how about maybe I'll just watch a little movie downstairs when people are sleeping. Or maybe how about I go shopping and take some of the funds of the lay people? And that's how you start breaking the precepts. It's a slippery slope, and it can start from something very innocent to something quite dangerous, which is why one needs to once again nourish that faith for the triple gem, and then nourish the faith for the training, that these are not just precepts. We don't take 311 precepts. They're not just like random things that, okay, that makes me a bhikkhuni, so I have my little ID card. Actually, I don't, but so to speak, it's not something, that's not the point of monastic life, nor it's the point of being a lay Buddhist practitioner, but rather it has to be, once again, a training that we revere, that brings good benefit. And Kaiser Fram says, it feels a bit uneasy to practice puja coming from a tradition that doesn't do that. I would like to do something to build up faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Though. What is a simple way to do so? Feel a bit uneasy. That is what it, it's part of the process. You do it, you do it, you do it. One of the biggest teachings I had, starting with my scientific materialist mind and running Buddhist Insights for the past 5 years in a lot of innovative ways, so to speak. So if you see, especially at the beginning, when I was a layperson and had lots of different ideas, I'm a very creative person. There were so many different ways through which we were practicing and kind of recreating the wheel. And now it just came to me that was so much effort that was not right effort. And rather, sometimes we don't need to remake the wheel, but we actually just need to spin the wheel. And so this comes also with what we see, what we identify as religious practices. Even when I had started Buddhist Insights for the first year, I was not bowing, for example. I would not define myself as Buddhist. I was very resistant. All my life, I had identified, after the age of 10, I had identified as agnostic. So I was not very interested in getting any type of label. And then after a year, I remember I was like, okay, every time non-Buddhist people ask me what I'm doing, it takes me forever to explain what I am doing. How about I just use this word that explains what I'm doing, which is Buddhist? It's kind of like, instead of using the word table, you spend 4 hours describing the table. Like, oh, so what do you do when you're working? So I use this 4-legged structure that has a surface and legs, and it might be made of wood or of steel. Like, I use a table. So it was the same thing. At a certain point, I was like, okay, it's very practical to just use the word Buddhist. And it was the same kind of like with the bowing. At the very beginning, I was very resistant. I was not going to do anything that was religious, that my mind perceived as religious. And then I remember on retreat once, I just started bowing for the sake of getting more, actually for the sake of supporting my meditation practice. And it supported my meditation practice. And I was mind blown. I had not read that sutta that way today. Created the conditions: reverence for the Buddha, reverence for the Dhamma, reverence for the Sangha, even if it was just a little bit. Bowing is something that takes both mind and body to develop that reverence. It's incredible. Even if you do it somewhat forcefully, it still has beneficial results. And as I started practicing in this way, I was like, actually there's a little bit more into all these practices than what my mind is catching in the surface. So it's not necessarily the equivalent of this. I think I'm Italian, so I should know. Which, if done actually with purpose, probably also has incredible, beautiful meanings. I'm not quite sure, because I never did that symbol in any profound way. It was just kind of a ritual. So whatever, after the age of 10, I stopped doing that sign, and I was not interested in picking up any other sign. But when in Buddhist practice we start really taking on the things that have been brought to us as gifts instead of taking them as heavy burdens. We're like, oh, these are beautiful gifts that have been preserved or developed. It's a tradition. Tradition is something beautiful. Why do people say that Italy is such a beautiful country? Because we're full of traditions that have been preserved, some wholesome, some less wholesome. But there is something powerful, incredible in preserving or generating. Why is food so tasty and so beautiful in Italy and a little bit less so here in the United States? Because there is no culture, no culinary culture here in this country. Why is Chinese food incredible? When you go to Asia, actually, all the different foods there are magnificent. There is a millenary culture that has produced that in the new world, as they call it. American food, less so. So yeah, instead of like trying to create the new whatever restaurant in town of Buddhism, which I was also guilty of trying to do. Oh, no, let's modify these things because they're not exactly what I like or what are suitable for me. Let's get all of that rubbish out of the way. And this is the quick fast. This is the fast route. The fast route is to practice in accordance to tradition. So yeah, at the very beginning, it will be uncomfortable. You'll hate the hell out of that bowing, but just bow. Actually, as they say in a lot of temples, they go bow, bow, bow. The lay people to help us, Westerners. And it's extremely compassionate. It's very helpful. It is great. And the more you bow, then after a while, you embed it, you embrace it, and you're like, oh, this is great. This is helpful. This is removing defilements from my mind. So yeah, the path is always easy for those who have no preferences. So get that out of the way and just do it. How's that? All right, and I think that was the last question this morning, and we have 3 minutes left, so I think that's all. So we can end with 3 sadhus, and we'll be meeting again this evening at 7:30 p.m. and tomorrow again, and tomorrow evening again, and then the day after tomorrow again. And then we'll have a monk chat related to the subject matter on Friday evening. So you can bring more personal questions on Friday if you like. But you're, of course, welcome to ask questions throughout the workshop. All right, so let's end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Have a great rest of the day or week, or life.